4, Volume 1, page 173. How many teacher vacancies and other staff vacancies does the department currently have?
Thank you, Member for Morialta, and I can give you a bit of detail on that question in response to that question. So, at the beginning of the 2024 school year, 68 positions remained unfilled, which compared to 71 in 2023 and 86 in 2022. The majority of these roles were in country areas and for secondary teacher positions. I can give you updated figures since then. At week 10 of term 1, the department was supporting sites with 41 teaching vacancies. So we saw a drop, which was good. But as of week 3, term 2, which is the most recent data I have, the department was supporting sites with strategies to fill 56 unfilled vacancies. Maybe I'll give a little bit of context. We all know what a difficult environment it is nationally at the moment to attract and retain staff. South Australia is in a far better position than other states, which is a great thing. We need to keep it that way, but those pressures continue, particularly in country areas. Some of the reasons for vacancies, which I don't think will come as a surprise to this committee, around teachers winning new roles or taking leave, backfilling of leave, people leaving the system and retirements as well, and we've seen an increase in that here and an increase everywhere else. So current data, just to summarise that answer, is 56 unfilled vacancies, and that's a small decrease on where we have been previously, but still obviously a lot of work to do to continue to protect us from higher vacancies and the kind that we've seen in particularly states like Victoria and New South Wales.
Does the Minister have any advice, or has the department offered any advice in relation to what's anticipated for term 3? Are we expecting that 56 to become a harder task for term 3, or is the pressure easing as the year goes on?
I don't have that advice at this stage. When I do, I'm happy to, speak to you about it if you wish, but at this stage, I don't have projections of whether it's going to get harder or easier. I would probably surmise that the fluctuation that we saw from start of the year at 68 and then end of week 10, term 1 dropping to 41 and then back to 56 for week 3 of term 2, then they tend to go up and down, but I'm happy to update when I can if we get any projections about what the department expects to happen for term 3.
How many vacancies is the department carrying in corporate support services and other non-teaching roles?
Provide an answer back to the committee, Member for Morialta.
Thank you. How many staff are currently suspended due to investigations of the nature which the Minister would be briefed on, I imagine, on a monthly basis?
That on notice.
Is the government anticipating the use of waivers for teaching students and other unregistered teachers increasing or decreasing to fill these vacancies?
Just to clarify, your question is, do we anticipate the number of waivers for teaching positions to go up to try to fill the existing vacancies that we have?
Well, perhaps I can ask the question with a little bit more context. I mean, basically, yes, but the 56 roles that were vacant at week 3 in term 2, I'm guessing that either some or a larger number of those were supported with TRTs, who might be permanent employees of the department, or they might not. Some of them, I understand, would be supported by teaching students who have got waivers from the Teachers Registration Board, given the current circumstance. So my question isn't just about those 56, it's more of a broad question. I understand the department's been working with the TRB to facilitate those waivers, and is your advice that the use of those waivers for this purpose will continue and increase, or is it something that's being sought to be phased out over the medium term? Sorry, I think I used the wrong term. I think I should have used special authority to teach.
So at this stage, I don't think there's been any advice provided to me that we expect it to go up, but I would imagine it will still be a part of what we try to do to fill vacancies. And department obviously is looking at that continually, which I think is important. But as I said, I don't have current advice that we're expecting an increase in that as part of our strategy that we have for dealing with the vacancies that we currently have.
Thank you. We asked a similar question last year, and I don't know if the Minister has figures to hand, but how many teachers who are teaching in the country exercised their right of return after teaching in the country for a required period of time last year in 2023? I understand there's been some changes to the way this is working, but are you able to identify for each of the for last year to start with, and then any previous data you have on teachers exercising right of return to come to the city?
Thanks, Member for Morialta. And just as we're trying to find an answer for you on that, opportunity for me just to respond to what you alluded to in your question around there being changes, and that is correct. But what we made sure that we did in response to very clear feedback from the profession was retain the right of teachers who have or previously had a right of return to go back to what is generally a metropolitan teaching position to do that. We didn't support the notion of taking away that right. Having said that, we know that it can cause complications for sites. It's feedback that I've certainly received from principals on many occasions, and I would guess that you probably have too, that it can be an impost upon leadership in a, let's say hypothetically, a metropolitan school that is feeling quite settled with staff and then gets told that there is a teacher coming from elsewhere to exercise their right of return. But it is, of course, I think a big step to consider removing that, given that the person who, for instance, might have gone to the country to fill a role there most likely did so under the expectation, commitment that once they were finished, they would be able to go back to their other roles. So we didn't suggest removing that. the information that I have, Member from Morialta, is that as of this year, I think 86 workforce management team in the department, led by Marina Elliott, have placed 86 teachers. And there will be more. I'm happy to try to get more specifics for you and provide that on notice, but my advice is, as of this year, I think that 86 would be those who have exercised right of return, who have been placed under that entitlement that they have.
Can I ask, on the same line, how does that square with the Premier's commitment prior to the election? And I think there was a Facebook post in which he said that principals should determine who they hire to have in their schools, not bureaucrats in Flinders Street. I'm paraphrasing, but I'm sure the Minister remembers the post. Maybe I can ask it in a more straightforward manner. Has the department changed the process for how these placed teachers are, placed within schools? And do principals have the right to say no if they don't wish to accept that teacher?
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Member from Morialta. Yes, and I certainly remember that issue, and I will accept that your paraphrasing of my comments is, as accurate, if not more accurate, than many things that are said in this place. And happy to give you an answer, because yes, we have made changes, and the changes that we have made are in line with that commitment that I gave around trying to, I guess, provide more ability for site leaders to have a say and choose who is working at their school. And there's a few things I can take you through there. So in 2023, the department worked with principal associations and the union to co-design and evaluate changes to the recruitment and placement system. And those changes included, but aren't limited to, expanding the eligibility criteria for conversions to permanency to create stability for schools and preschools and certainty for teachers as well. And that is also an election commitment we made around increasing levels of permanency in the system. Advertising all teaching roles at the same time rather than sequencing country, metropolitan, permanent and contract roles, so that teachers had visibility to all roles, which wasn't the case previously, and I'm pretty sure that was feedback that not only the department got, that I received as well, and to reduce consequential vacancies arising late in the year, which are harder for leaders to fill. Enabling site leaders to match teachers with that industrial right that you and I have just discussed to a permanent right to a permanent role, to a suitable role in their school, rather than corporate teams choosing the site and advising site leaders of the outcome. And I think that gets to the heart of the question, and a good one it is too, around what we are trying to do. It is a tricky space in which to work, because we are operating within industrial requirements that are legislated, or mandated I should say, as part of the enterprise agreement. So not all things are possible, but we have done a number of things here, including giving those site leaders more of a say in terms of matching staff to their site that they will be, they think will be a good fit, and we do that under the our understanding that leaders know their sites best. Recruiting and reappointing leadership roles earlier in the year to reduce the number of leaders being placed as a permanent teacher in a school as per their industrial entitlement, then winning another leadership role and leaving the school with a vacancy late in the year. I have seen this happen at a number of schools in my own area, which I think is not a great outcome, particularly for the school community, if they have just got used to a new leader and then potentially losing them late in the year and being left in a situation of uncertainty. Introducing a more contemporary approach to recruitment by trialling online tools to improve the applicant's experience, create efficiencies for the department and reduce administrative burden for our school and preschool leaders. So this is the advice I've got from the workforce management team around what they've done, and I can say that the evaluation of the changes that we conducted in 2023, and we evaluated those changes with the organisations that were part of the co-design, which was the principal associations and the AEU. That feedback was positive and constructive, which is good. I think we have made good on the commitment that we made, and certainly I can say to this place with my hand on my heart, the feedback I do get from principals is that those changes have been beneficial.
I imagine that there's also, given the shortage of teachers at the moment, probably principals who are eager to recruit staff at a higher level than maybe 5-10 years ago too, which probably makes it easier. But I just want to touch on one of the issues you raised, which was the Labor commitment to increase permanency. And we've discussed this at each of the last two estimates as well. The commitment was, and I quote, to increase the percentage of permanent teachers by at least 10%. My recollection is 2 years ago, the Minister said that they were working on what the figure would be, and that last year I think it was characterised as an aspirational goal rather than data set in stone. But I could be mischaracterising that. But I'm wondering, has the department got a figure on what they currently view as the permanent teaching workforce? I think last year the suggestion was it was about 80%. But the Minister identified that that was a contested figure by the AEU and potentially other stakeholders.
Sorry, could you just repeat the end of that question, Member for Morialta? My apologies.
Well, the straightforward question, it would be, what is the department's figure for permanency in teachers? I think last year it was in the order of 80%.
I'll get you the figure on what we calculate our permanency rate at. I can tell you, though, that we're going to have to do a lot more to meet the election commitment. But that is not for lack of massively increasing conversions to permanency, and I'm just making sure I've got the up-to-date data there, because we are converting at a rate, I think, that is above what the department has ever done before. But of course, because of turnover in the system, which is not unique to our state, but an issue, it is meaning we're going to have to accelerate.
Well, I wonder if the Minister wants to, I'm happy for you to take it on notice. I'd be keen to understand the data that the Minister's using, identifying that he said it has to accelerate, but what was the percentage in 2022, 23 and this year, comparing apples with apples?
Yes, no. On the percentages, I'll come back to you on that, but as I said, I'm being pretty straight up here and saying it will need to do even more than we're doing, because we're up against it in terms of movement in the system. But I can perhaps just give some context in terms of how hard the department and I are trying and what we're doing to try to meet that commitment. And I don't give these figures as an aspersion on your time as Minister or any previous Minister, because it was a different environment, and I accept that. But conversion of temporary to permanent, 2017, 56, 2018, 359, 2019, 263, 2020, 208, 2021, during COVID, I accept, 106, 2022, 206, 2023, 512, and as of the 24th of January 2024, I'm sure that is right, but 2024 figure I've got is 683. So we have really accelerated. We are doing it at a rate. The reason the election commitment that you correctly refer to talks about increasing by at least 10% is because in constructing that election commitment at the time, there was and remains a difference of opinion between the department and the union around what existing levels of permanency are. So rather than get caught in that quagmire, we made a commitment to, regardless of what the union and department at the time believed it was, we would increase it by 10%. And if we can keep up the acceleration that we have over the last few years, I still think that we can do it, but that is going to have to increase for us to be successful.
Can the Minister provide a definition of what those numbers are he was just quoting? In particular, I'm wondering, is that conversion of individual roles to permanency within the school that they are? Is that the figure that the Minister was quoting? Or is it the net figure on the number of extra permanent roles created within the system during the course of the year? And the reason I ask for the clarification is, of course, during 2020 and 21, there was an enormous shift from teachers working in primary schools to high schools. Yes. Now, that may impact the net figure or it may not, but I'm wondering if the Minister can define those numbers he was just quoting.
Understood. the Chief Executive who will provide you an answer on that.
It's not the net figure, the on-balance figure, it's the number of individuals who are on temporary contracts who got moved to permanency.
So, thank you for that. My understanding of the election commitment would not be using that as the basis, though. My understanding of the election commitment was to increase the percentage of permanent teachers by at least 10%, which would suggest to me that the net figure is the more relevant one. So I'm wondering if within the system, number of teachers, a percentage of those who are permanent increasing by 10%. That's how I take the election commitment to be. I think that's how most people would be. I don't think that you can get that figure in a sensible way from just thinking about people who transfer within their current job. If they go from contract teacher at one school to a permanent teacher at another school, and overall the system has more permanent teachers, then to me that is producing an uplift, and I'm not sure that those figures have a fair reflection of the system-wide effort.
Thank you, Member for Morialta. And I take your point. I don't think necessarily that we are in agreement on that, so I will take it on notice and I will provide a more detailed answer around our methodology. But just want to reiterate that we are, despite what we're up against, I think the election commitment was a really important one, and I would like to think that those lower levels of vacancies that we have here compared to elsewhere are in some way there because we are doing what we can to give people permanency. I have been approached by parents of young teachers at street corner meetings in my area, saying, young teachers are being asked to go elsewhere and being offered higher salaries, which is what happens, and would stay if they were offered permanency, which to me speaks to why it's an important thing to do, because it might be the difference in having particularly a young contract teacher stay as a teacher instead of choosing a different profession. So we'll get on with that, but I'll get you more detailed answers to your questions.
Thank you, sir. Can I ask about the other aspect of the same policy, which was not just principals' right to hire the teachers they want, but also what was described in the media as the principal's right to fire. I don't think that's, in fairness, how the detail of the policy was characterised. The Minister has previously talked about reducing the time that somebody would be under performance management. In posing the question, I highlight that the major risk to the time frame blowing out in previous years was teachers exercising their right to go on stress leave or other sorts of industrial rights being used. I'm wondering, has there been any change to the use of those industrial rights, and has the promise of the Labor government to effectively the right to fire, or characterise however you will, has that been fulfilled? Do you want me to pass to you to clarify first?
Yeah, I'll give you an answer to that question. Thank you, Member for Morialta. We might offer a clarification to our answer on the previous question while I'm finding you an answer to that one. Do you want to do it?
So just on that, the clarification I want to give is around the placement question. Because of the advice that I gave to the Minister, I just want to make sure that it's clear that 86 teachers that we referred to this year are actually teachers who are eligible for placement, but we don't think will need placing next year. So we're not considering them for placements next year. I think your question was about the country teachers that need placing. So for identified in 2024, for placement in 2025, we've got 34 country to metro transfers that we have to place.
Okay. And you've got more than 34 schools that are very, very keen to get new teachers, so that'll be helpful.
On to your next question, Member for Morialta. Yes, I'll say from the outset, I and we firmly believe we have met our election commitment on the management of underperforming teachers or unsatisfactory performance. And there's some detail I would perhaps like to take the committee through here. We have updated the Managing Unsatisfactory Performance Guideline to include a 10-week formal performance management process to speed up the removal of underperforming teachers. The new timeframe is applicable to all department staff. Between the 1st of July last year and the 20th of May this year, the performance support team received contact from 684 leaders seeking advice on how to address performance concerns. Those outcomes include, I'm happy to provide this as detail to the committee, 6 employees are deemed resigned on the basis of being absent without authority. 1 was a teacher. 11 employees did not have their contracts renewed. 6 were teachers. 6 employees had their employment terminated. 1 was a teacher. 45 employees resigned. That includes 5 workers' compensation redemptions, and of that 45, 20 were teachers. 42 employees' performance improved. 20 of those were deemed to have improved, which I think we can agree is the best outcome if it can be achieved. 20 were teachers, and 11 employees were required to participate in formal performance management. 6 of those were teachers. The position of the department, and I support this, is that the early assistance and advice that's being provided to site leaders, and we concede with the 684 figure that a lot are reaching out and seeking that, that is contributing to a lower number compared to previous years of underperforming employees progressing to the formal performance management process. And this was one of the things that we grappled with when designing this, was because of the complicated nature of how the formal performance management process was taking place. Once teachers found themselves within that, I think it was rarely bringing about situations where the teacher was either determined to have improved their performance and go back into the classroom, and then a delay if that wasn't the case, and it was deemed that that wasn't possible, for a decision to be made on them being moved on. So I guess one of the fundamental parts of this change is to provide advice early in the piece to leaders when they reach out in regards to what they believe is an underperforming employee, in the hope that something can be addressed earlier and not needing the formal performance management process to be used. Now, of the 6 teachers who did participate in that, 3 are on leave and not currently teaching, so the process has been suspended. 1 had their employment terminated. 1 resigned from their employment, and 1 currently in process. So I think we will look closely at the outcomes of those as a way of informing us about whether or not any other changes potentially need to happen or not. But certainly the feedback that I've received and the department has received has been positive, and we think it is contributing to a process that is better for leaders and a process that is better for staff, who I think had, in years gone past, had been caught up in very, very long, seemingly never-ending processes, which was a bad outcome for them and a bad outcome for the site leader and a bad outcome from the school. And I know that we've got very strong support for the changes that we've made from both the secondary principals and primary principals associations as well, who believe that it's been a really positive change.
The Minister, and this is my last question on this run, the Minister identified a series of categories, numbers, just then this year. Can the Minister, and very happy to take it on notice, find the equivalent numbers for each of the last 5 years?
Happy to take that on notice, Member for Morialta.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move to page 174, the investing expenditure summary. And 2 years ago, the Minister was good enough to take on notice a request to provide a budgeted expenditure for all projects for each year of the forward estimates. I think he might have done so again last year. Would he again be able to provide us with such a list this year?
Yes, happy to do so again this year, Member for Morialta.
Thank you. Will families at Plympton International College and Errington Special School have access to an OSH facility on campus next year?
Yes, thank you, Member for Morialta. I'm aware of the public debate on this issue, and there's a few things that perhaps I can put on the record here in regards to Plympton International out of school hours care facilities. I was written to by the chairperson in May regarding the OSH facilities. it was a request for funding of, I think, between $450,000 and $500,000 to purchase a prefabricated building to service as a dedicated space for an expanded OSH. Department staff met with representatives from the school on the 8th of May and the 24th of May on how the school can utilise its existing $14 million redevelopment to construct a multi-purpose facility where OSH services could also be delivered. $23.5 million has been provided, I think, all by Labor governments. If I'm wrong about that, I'm sure you will correct me. $3.5 million for STEM in 2016, $3 million under Building Better Schools in 2017, a $3 million election commitment for a kiss and drop road improvements and additional classrooms, 2022, and a $14 million capital upgrade to which I just referred from the 23-24 state budget. Architects have been appointed and I understand planning is underway. I accept what the member for Morialta has said. There is need like this right across the system, I'm not for a second saying to the Plympton community that that their request isn't without merit, because we have so many requests for new and refurbished infrastructure that do have merit that the budget just cannot accommodate, and sort of goes to the heart of the infrastructure plan that we released, which is about trying to set some sort of clear parameters around what we use to make decisions around where we put the money that we do have, which I would like that bucket of money to be larger. There's no doubt the member for Morialta wished it to be larger when he was the Minister for Education. But if we were to accommodate the funding request of an additional roughly $500,000, it would come at the expense of something else. And on all those infrastructure projects that we announced recently, and I think probably all the ones that have been announced since the election, I've taken the advice of the department on what are priorities and what are not priorities. In terms of your more specific question around what do we do around Plympton International College having an OSH, the department has given its commitment to work with the school to make sure there's an OSH there next year. Having dedicated OSH spaces is a topic that comes up all the time. My own three daughters we use OSH for them at a public primary school. It's not a dedicated room, it's a room that becomes a classroom during the day and then becomes the OSH at 10 minutes past 3, and I know the OSH team there all too well when I arrive at 5:59 to pick the kids up and have a chat to them. And they would certainly like a dedicated OSH space as well, but we will work with Plympton International here to make sure there is an OSH. But in terms of the broader question, we've certainly supported Plympton International with significant funding in a number of different ways. It's a school which is, I think, the enrolment figures are pretty impressive in terms of how they have changed over recent years, which I think is fantastic. I have no issue with schools advocating for, including governing councils, getting out and advocating for more spending. That's what governing councils are there to do. Ultimately, I'm in this job, and that the people around me are in these jobs to decide where we prioritise the money that we do have.
Thank you. The Minister mentioned the 20-year infrastructure plan in his answer and how that would guide commitments of funding. Can I clarify that the 20-year infrastructure plan does envisage that funding will go to meet the capacity needs of schools that are bursting at the seams, that do have significant growth, and that is one of the criteria that is used to assess where expenditure on school infrastructure should go, growing school populations?
It's a good question, member from Morialta. Yes, no, that's certainly a criteria. It's one of a few, but of course that's an important criteria.
Thank you. And on that basis, I took the Minister at face value and I think on occasion at the school warmly congratulated the government for the provision of the $14 million to Plympton in last year's budget on the basis that it was needed, that Plympton is a rapidly growing school that has gone from a few hundred students at the beginning of my time as Shadow Education Minister 9 years ago to where it's about to tip over 1,000, I think. So on that basis, my understanding was that the scope of works last year was absolutely required. Can the Minister perhaps provide the original scope of works determined as necessary when the $14 million project was awarded, and what are the current scope of works now that some value management has already been applied?
I might pass over to the Deputy Chief Executive, Ben Templey, to answer your question.
Thank you, Minister. Through you, there's a number of different funding streams going into Plympton International College at the moment. So there's the original commitment that was made under the previous government, plus there's some additional funding going into support additional scope through election commitment of the current government. So we're working with the school to meet the original scope of all of those commitments through the funding that's available. But as you referenced, value management is needed from time to time in order to bring those projects in on budget. I haven't got the exact detail to provide a detailed comparison of original versus current, but we'd be happy to provide that detail.
Thank the Deputy Chief Executive and the Minister. Can the Minister advise if it's a fair characterisation of his previous answer that a dedicated OSH space is not an essential requirement of a large and growing public school with large numbers of students in primary years?
I wouldn't accept that characterisation. What I'm just saying is that there are lots and lots of sites across the state that don't have a dedicated OSH. And I understand that they would all like that. And given that the range of commitments this government has made on OSH, which I would be pretty confident in saying is more than any government before it has made in terms of trying to prioritise OSH, we well and truly understand that need. But no, my answer should not be characterised as saying that that's not a valid request. I think I said from the start, I understand what they're asking for has merit. Unfortunately, we are up against, as we always are, what the budget can and can't accommodate. Hence, I think that really important need, as the Auditor General said, for a infrastructure plan, which gives us some firm criteria in which to make those decisions, but tries to give a bit, a modicum of transparency to not so much those sites that get funding, but those who don't, around how we are making our decisions.
I don't want to... I've got one more on this, sir.
No, that's okay. I think you start to stray a little bit in terms of your questioning, so perhaps get back to the budget lines.
Well, I'll go to the budget line that we've been on, page 175. There's a line for Plympton International College, $14 million being spent, and my questions are directly to the use of that expenditure. I put it to the Minister that the Minister has identified in his last answer the government has made a lot of commitments to OSH services, that we have a $14 million project currently underway where there is a negotiation between the school and the department on the exact use of that, that we have an OSH service that doesn't just service this school but the special school next door as well, and the Minister identifying the desirability of improving OSH services around the state. I ask the Minister to take into consideration a reconsideration of this relatively modest adjustment in the scheme of these new facilities. And I just introduce one new element, That being that if there is a 20-year infrastructure plan which has criteria for gauging where investments should go, it strikes me that such an investment would be absolutely within that, were it not that we're in a scarcity environment and there's limited funds to go around. I put it to the Minister only that this project of an OSH dedicated space at Plympton is not going to get cheaper if it is not incorporated in this current build, and encourage the Minister to give this further consideration in the months ahead.
Thank you. I guess I'll take that on notice. As I've said, our position on this is not brought about because we don't believe that the ask or request from the Plympton school community is without merit. It is brought about by the fact that we have a finite budget available for infrastructure. We could spend what we have. Chris Bernardi can probably do the maths in his head many times over. As Minister, I think it is important that we look at schools that have received some kind of funding support. Plympton is certainly one, and it has made very good use of that money, as the member for Morialta rightly said, and its enrolment turnaround is possibly of a like we haven't seen anywhere else. It is a real success story. But I go to schools almost every single day that haven't had any level of support, and I know how they feel when, even for meritorious projects like a dedicated OSH for Plympton, get money and they don't, they certainly ask the question around what it's going to take for them to get some support. And the foundation of the 20-year infrastructure plan, the sort of foundation on which it is built is to make every school a great school, which I do really want us to stick to, and I am hell-bent on trying to achieve as best I can in whatever time I get in this role, and Plympton is one of the best examples of it. So I think is the Heights, Valley View, probably a long list of those who, once a bit of funding support was sent their way, some excellent leadership, perhaps a specialisation, they were able to dramatically turn around enrolment figures so that we were using that latent capacity at those sites, which is good for the community that lives around it, so they can use their local school, but it's a more equitable and economic, I guess, way of using the money that we have available to us, rather than having to build something new or expand something existing. But in order for us to achieve every school a great school and the aims of the infrastructure plan, we do have to make sure we try to focus on schools that haven't attracted any. Plympton is a school that has, and that's one of the criteria I think that we need to take into account when we're deciding what we do. But the commitment I've made earlier that I reiterate is that the department is working with Plympton International to make sure there is a good functioning OSH there.
I've got a question on the same page in relation to infrastructure. Will the Minister and the Department reconsider the request from Unley High School's Governing Council for funding to expand their capacity so they do not have to impose a capacity management plan in future years?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. Well, yes, and I'm of course very well aware of this, and the desire of Unley High School to have some further infrastructure and capital works. Again, extremely Unley High School is certainly another success story, school of choice, school in great great demand. A school, however, that has had some significant funding support in recent years, I think, from, if I'm correct, both sides of politics. $32.5 million major facility upgrade, 20 from former Labor government, I think, Building Better Schools, 12.5 from new member for Morialta for Year 7 to high school. In capacity was increased by 450 students from 1,250 to 1,700. And you know, I guess my answer will be in some way in the same vein as my answer to the last question about Plympton, and that is that you know, it is a school that has attracted significant funding support, whereas others have not. The Deputy Chief Executive reminds me that the capacity is 1,700. Current forecasts are, I think, 1,669 for 2025 and 1,681 for 2026. The department believes it can be managed. I don't think I have it in front of me, but from memory, the number of out-of-zone, 33% of current students are living outside the zone, including 24% of Year 7 students. And I accept that's because they want to go to that school, and it's a great school, but we have zones for a reason to manage capacity. And I'm not entirely sure, I know the member for Unley has made comments about the department encouraging the school to do a business case, and I think forcing them to spend money on a business case and giving them the impression that we were supporting them for that. That is not the advice that I have from the department, and certainly the correspondence that I have seen, I think from a director level in the infrastructure team doesn't support that. If there is something that the member for Unley or Morialta would like to bring to my attention that I'm not aware of, I'd be keen to hear it. But from what I've seen, the department's position that it doesn't support that has been very, very clear. And as I said, I've taken the department's advice on what is a priority at this stage and what is not. I'll continue to do that. But again, commend the Governing Council chair there for his strong advocacy and standing up for his school.
Thank you. Moved back one page to 174, Mount Barker High School and Mount Barker New Preschool and Primary School under the new projects lines. I draw to the attention of the Minister the representations of the Mount Barker Council, which he may or may not have seen. In relation to new school capacity, they characterise the new preschool and primary school are expected to provide an additional 100 preschool places and 350 primary school places, but with operations not commencing until 2028, there is a risk these places will not suffice given projected population growth over the next 4 years. In relation to the high school, the Council welcomes the funding, but it says it's unclear if this funding will be adequate to fully address the infrastructure and capacity challenges faced by the school. To put it in context, the council, which is the fastest growing LGA in South Australia, has said, and I quote from their press release, it's forecast that for the next 22 years, Mount Barker will welcome a new classroom of school-aged children every 2 months, or a total of 3,316 school-aged children. The Mayor, David Leach, is quoted as saying that we urge the government to consider additional measures to ensure all local children have access to quality education, and the council has been arguing for a new birth to Year 12 public school. Does the Minister have a response to council, and in this context, can he advise if the processes that have been guiding the decision to do a new primary school and not a new birth to 12 school have been informed by Infrastructure SA along the way?
So I can confirm, and I should say from the outset, I met with the Mayor of Mount Barker here last sitting week, I think, to discuss these, and I'm aware of the media release that the Council put out and the issues brought to the attention of this place by the member for Morialta. And if I recall correctly, I think I got a question, it might have been in a question time from the member for Morialta in a previous sitting week about whether or not these things would go through Infrastructure SA, and I said that they would, and they have, and that includes the matter before us now. And it is so a departmental process, a lengthy one. Then Deloitte supported the work through Infrastructure SA as well. So it's been through a really, really thorough process, and what we've announced has been informed by that. I understand the council's position. We all know that provision of public schooling in the Mount Barker area has not kept up with growth, and the planning has not been adequate. And this has been a long time coming, but we have stuck to the commitment that I made around taking departmental advice and the advice of Infrastructure SA in terms of what we provide here, and that's what we've done with a new preschool and a new primary school as well. One thing that I think wasn't mentioned in the council's press release was the commitment we made to Oakbank as well. I think 15.9 million, which is another school that I think falls into that category of let's make every school a great school. Lee Knight, the principal there, I think is doing exceptional work. It's a great school. It has something like 150 vacant enrolment places, I think. It is 15 minutes from Mount Barker. It's close to other areas, and the reason that we there's a number of reasons that we committed that money, but we see that as a school that can soak up some of the enrolment demand around the area as well. So I think that's probably something that wasn't mentioned by Mount Barker Council, which they probably could have been of a bit more focus on, giving that's a pretty significant commitment for the local area as well. And I expect that once those works are complete, that those enrolment places will quite quickly fill up, as we've seen in other places like the schools we've just spoken about, Unley and Plympton International, when the same kind of new infrastructure has been provided there.
So just one follow-up on this question. The Minister is confident that despite the Council saying that they'll need an extra 3,300 places over the next, acknowledging 22 years, that for the foreseeable future, the Minister is confident that the modest extra investment at Mount Barker High School, which has already had some extra investment in recent years, and the new investment at Oakbank, those two public high schools will be sufficient for the foreseeable future for Mount Barker? Or is it the Department's view that there might need to be further high school infrastructure commitments next decade, but they're not needed now?
I'll just pass over to Deputy Chief Executive Ben Templey to answer that question.
Thank you, Minister. Through you, as the Council indicates, the population change in Mount Barker is happening over time. We're confident that with the initial addition of the increased capacity coming through this year's state budget, that will certainly help meet future demand. However, we're also conscious that the population is increasing, and we're continuing to monitor the changes in the demographics in Mount Barker, and we'll continue to provide advice to the government in accordance to those changes.
New budget line, budget paper 3, page 23. I'm looking at the overall expenses for selected agencies. I'm sure there's another place this figure is represented as well. But if you go to the Education Department, it identifies last year's budget as being 4.6 billion, the estimated result being just under 4.8 billion. It's a variance of about 139 million. Can you advise why this variance is? Unkind people might characterise it as a blowout, but I'm sure there's other ways to characterise it too.
So you would not do that. pass over to Chris Bernardi, who's itching to have a swing at this one, and let him have a go.
Thank you, Minister. Through you, as outlined in the budget papers, the expenditure increase is related to the different programs within the department. We have early years education and also skills. And for example, as outlined in budget paper number 4, page 181, we've got higher expenditure in government schools, the impact of carryover in the estimated result, including the National Student Wellbeing Program boost funding, higher indexation in relation to the National Schools Reform Agreement, Commonwealth funding for the School Upgrade Fund. And then we've got in the 23-24 financial year, the new enterprise agreement was approved. So we've got costs in there in the estimated result that's causing a variation of that as well. So there are other expenses movements in the other programs as well, and I can sort of take those on notice and give you a more detailed explanation of that.
Thank you, and Mr Bernardi's mother is a constituent of mine, so say hi to your mum for me, please.
I will do that.
Just to clarify then, I'm looking at budget paper 4, volume 1, page 181, where Mr Bernardi's just directed us, and it identifies $78 million being the impact of the enterprise agreement. Can I clarify, did the final settlement reached in the EB agreement require extra funds to be provided, or was it within the negotiating margin that Treasury would have set for that negotiation to take place all along?
Pass to Chris Bernardi to answer that question.
Thanks, Minister. So normally, as per standard processes, with the Gonski funding that was approved a while back, we managed the costs of the education type activities from within existing resources. So as part of our normal budget planning, we would budget for expected outcomes of the EB in relation to education, and that includes price increases, wage increases, plus also other policy type decisions. So the part of the EB that relates to the education activities are funded from within our existing resources. But in terms of the early years, we, as per normal standard processes, we are unable to use Gonski funding for that, so our budget is supplemented via Treasury and Cabinet to meet the full cost of the preschool early years component of the EB.
I thank Mr Bernardi, and can I clarify then? I understand Mr Bernardi has explained that the funding for the EB was able to be entirely paid for from within existing resources on the basis that the Gonski entitlement had enough headroom to allow for that funding to take place. My understanding, though, is within the department's budgetary processes, it would know what the Gonski entitlement would have for expenditure in the years ahead, because that's based on the formula, or at least it would have a pretty good estimate. But the department would have notional allocations for how much it would be allocating to the cost or wages, the EB cost, and then other projects within the Gonski allocation that the department would like to pursue, whether they be a new South Australian curriculum or autism support teachers or wellbeing teachers or other aspects. Did the EB agreement come within the department's notional allocation for what it anticipated the EB would cost, or have some of those other Gonski applicable measures needed to be reduced in order to cope with a higher than expected EB agreement.
We'll take that on notice.
Thank you. How are students who are entering reception mid-year treated for funding purposes by the state and by the Commonwealth? Effectively, students that are doing that extra 6 months of reception over and above what the Commonwealth has previously argued they should be paying for.
Just a point of clarification, Member for Morialta, that I'm very happy to have a go at answering your question. Are you asking in relation to both the non-government and government sectors?
Just the government sector now. We'll talk about non-government a bit later in the day.
So, well, my answer would be the same for both us and, as in the government system and the non-government system. And I can obviously, as has been a matter of the for the public record, the federal government has unfortunately pulled its funding for mid-year intake, which comes as a cut for the public system in terms of the funding that we were going to be able to attract from the federal government towards the election commitment that we have made and are delivering to reintroduce mid-year intake for preschool and reception students, and of course also a cut to the non-government system as well. The federal government has given, as I understand it, transitional funding for a year, and I accept you want to discuss this bit in more detail in another session, which is fine, to the non-government system, and we have also provided some transitional funding to the non-government system as well. We have not, in the public system, as I understand it, attracted any transitional funding from the federal government, which of course is disappointing. I might leave my answer there. I'm happy for any follow-ups.
I guess I have two follow-up questions, and the first would, and I'll put them both to you and you can answer them together or one at a time. What is the loss or the cut from the federal government? What is the quantum of that based on what the state had been anticipating receiving? And then the second question is, what is therefore the cost to the state budget of this program, which is welcome obviously in schools or most schools?
Yep, understood. Member for Morialta, the money that we would have attracted from the federal government into the public system towards mid-year intake was approximately, I'm told, $7 million per year. So that is what we are now not receiving. And then in terms of the second part of your question, following enrolment offers in term 1 this year, verified mid-year enrolments were used to refine final funding for schools, as you would expect us to do, based on enrolments of 4,372 mid-year intake reception students, which I must say is a pretty positive response to the commitment that we made. The department is providing $29.4 million to primary schools in the 2024 school year.
And can I just clarify, that $29 million that the government is providing to primary schools, does that include the $7 million that you were hoping to get from the Commonwealth?
Member for Morialta, that 29.4 figure I gave you includes the money that we would have expected from the federal government.
Can I ask, is that 29 million going to be the ongoing sum, notwithstanding variations in enrolments? And the direct purpose of the question, I understand that some support was given to schools to enable them to take on teachers during the first half of the year, either this year or next year, I can't remember which. And so is that support going to be maintained going forward, or are schools going to have extra funding only in the second half of the year and then have to, if they want to maintain their mid-year reception teacher, if they have standalone classrooms for that, are they going to have to do that from within their own budgets? Will schools be funded effectively for the full year?
It's ongoing.
Okay, and so that's on the basis, that ongoing figure is on the basis of that extra support that schools have experienced this year?
I am told yes.
Bravo. Given that the Commonwealth doesn't seem to count these students towards its Gonski allocation, is the funding that the state government is putting into mid-year reception, there's $29 million per year, is the state government allowed to count it towards the state's Gonski allocation? Are these students counted for the purposes of our Gonski allocation?
Wait, who's been
Thank you.
patiently waiting for me to notice her attention.
Well timed, it was my last one in the run, depending on his
Perfect
answer.
timing then.
We'll take that on notice, Member for Morialta.
For wait.
Budget paper 4, volume 1, page 181.
Please, sorry.
Budget paper 4, volume 1, page 181. Can the Minister advise the Chamber of the outcomes of their enterprise bargaining?
Thank you, Member for Waite, for the question. And yes, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the enterprise bargaining agreement that we struck with the Australian Education Union. As members of this place, including yourself, will know, it was not an easy process. I know the member for Morialta went through one of those as well in his time as minister. It certainly went longer than I would have wished, probably longer than the union would have wished, and there were certainly times there where I did wonder whether or not we were going to be able to reach agreement or not. There were a few specific challenges, I think, in terms of these negotiations. One of those, of course, is that we were negotiating in a climate of teacher shortages nationally. Thankfully, nothing in South Australia like what other jurisdictions have seen, and I hope it stays that way. But also where teacher workload, I think, has increased for a long time now, based, I think, not exclusively, but primarily on the complexity of classrooms also increasing. So it was the first one in my memory, and I've been involved in a number where a pay increase was not solely the number one priority. I think the union stuck to its guns, to its credit, on doing something around workload, and that was even despite a lot of the hard heads around me telling me that would drop away, and at the end of the day, it's always just about the money. But I think it comes as a indication of the pressures that are out there, that the workload stuff and us trying to find a way to address it, which was exceptionally hard in the end, costly, remained an equal number one priority with a pay rise. And as I said at the time, and I'll say it again now, it's the biggest package of proposals ever provided to South Australian teachers. It's worth an estimated $1.6 billion over the life of the agreement. It's a 13% salary increase over the life of that agreement. Principals and preschool directors will receive a 16% salary increase over the life of the agreement. That was a point of contention as well. I stuck to my guns on that. I did not want that to be taken out. There were those, including some of the union, who did not like the idea of leadership receiving an additional salary increase. But I think, given the pressures on school principals and leadership teams now are so extreme, and the difficulty that we have as a system in keeping them there, attracting existing teachers to consider moving into a leadership position, that we have to look at things like this in order to be able to attract them into those roles and keep them in those roles. And I'm pleased that was able to be maintained. One of the most complicated things, of course, the complex part about the pay rise that we landed on is always finding a way for the budget to accommodate that. And that was true also of the increase in non-instructional time. But of course, the other challenge with the non-instructional time, which we have increased by an hour and are progressively rolling out, was not just how to afford it, and that was certainly a significant factor. But as I said at the start of my answer to your question, we're in an environment of it being harder to find teachers. And of course, in order to provide an extra hour of non-instructional time, there needs to be someone else standing at the front of the class, which means we need teachers to be able to do that, and hence the decision in the end to phase in the extra hour of non-instructional time from our most disadvantaged schools through to our more advantaged progressively. And I've had mixed feedback, I would say. There are always those who would say they would like that to be more. But if you have a look around the country, and every jurisdiction is dealing with the issue of workload. It is on the agenda for the national meetings that I have every single time. I am proud that we as a state have at least decided to tackle it as part of this enterprise bargaining agreement. It was frustrating that we were in a very lengthy back and forward around what are the things that we constantly hear have been added on top of the daily duties of a teacher that compound that workload issue that could be removed. And it comes as an existing source of frustration to me, I must say, that we can't collectively agree on what some of those things are and decide what we can remove and what we can't. And because that seems to be a task beyond all of us right across Australia, we come back to doing something which is probably a bit more of a blunt instrument, which is an extra hour of non-instructional time. But it was the only way, in the end, that I could see us making any kind of meaningful impact on the workload of teachers, and we managed to do it and provide a pay rise. I'd finish my answer by saying the country incentive zone allowance, bringing that, or making that ongoing, not only for staff who currently receive it, but would at the end of their usually 5 years, I think it is, lose it, but also bringing it back for country staff who have been in their role long beyond the 5-year period is something I'm very proud of that we kept in this. And there were moments where it was on a knife's edge. I think that's exceptionally important. And the first question from the member for Morialta today was a very fair one, of course, about teaching vacancies. And I said that where it's hardest is the country. And that will remain the case. And we have done something about that by saying, not only did we meet the election commitment we made in terms of making it ongoing for those who are getting it, but we are bringing it back as well. And in some cases, that is a significant increase in salary for those staff. And I think it will do well to continue to protect us in the way that we have been a bit more protected from the kind of teacher shortages that we've seen elsewhere. I'll leave my answer there.
No other questions? Nope. Member for Morialta.
On the targets at the top of page 180 references the National School Reform Agreement. What is the status of negotiations with the Commonwealth on that? Are we talking days, weeks, months, years?
Well, I certainly hope it's not years, I can tell you that, but it's hard going. There's no doubt about it. It is hard going. You know, and I don't in any way seek to make my answer political. There's no benefit in that for anyone, I don't think. But you know, it has been made clear by the federal opposition and the shadow education minister that if they are to become the government whenever the next federal election is, that there will be no more discussions around extra Gonski funding from that government. So that kind of brings things into very sharp focus, I think, for all states around trying to come to an agreement about how we get public schools to 100%, and we are 5% short in that endeavour. I do think we are inching closer, and I remain confident that we will come to an agreement. Of course, the considerations for the state are the funding split and what we can afford, and how soon we could bring whatever our share might be online, and they are, of course, considerations for the federal government as well. But adding on top of that, we have all requested the federal government to get back into providing infrastructure money for reasons that will be obvious to the member for Morialta, because all states are in the same position, at least in the public system that South Australia is in, which is that we are slipping behind. Stock is getting older, the age of buildings is getting older, the amount of money that we are spending on sort of upkeep and maintenance of buildings as opposed to building new ones or refurbishing them is increasing. So our capacity to do that is diminishing. The cost of builds has rapidly increased and significantly increased post-COVID, which again, we get less bang for our buck. I would point to the new Northern School as a very good example of that we are saying is going to be constructed in 2028. We've I think $155 million we've put towards that. I remember a time, the member for Morialta would remember a time not long ago where that would get you 2 schools. It now gets you 1, and that is out of the control of me and this department, and it is the same right around the country. So we are pushing hard on that too, because we need assistance, not just getting to 100%, which is important, but getting that infrastructure money as well. I think we are getting closer, and I remain confident that we can come to an agreement, but it has been a very difficult process.
Can the Minister may be reluctant to provide too much detail given an ongoing negotiation, so I won't spend too much time here, but are the allowances within the current agreement, of which the Minister has previously been critical of spending towards SACE and ESB being counted towards the state share, and the 4% allowed for depreciation and other matters, is the Minister committed to removing those percentages from the state contribution or do they potentially remain within the negotiation sphere?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. I think, given that negotiations are live and they may or not be topics of conversation within those negotiations, I will reserve an answer for a later time once we actually come to an agreement.
Right, I'm happy to move on to a different target. In fact, it's the next one, that's convenient, the South Australian curriculum. What is the purpose of having a South Australian curriculum for public education, as I think it's described, on top of the Australian curriculum, which is of course owned in part by the South Australian Government?
I'll hand over to the Chief Executive here, if the member for Morialta is okay with that, to provide some detail and perhaps answer as many questions as you wish to ask.
Thank you, Minister. So when we look at the Australian curriculum, of course the Australian curriculum is created centrally, provides that guidance across the country, but every jurisdiction looks at that and thinks about how it might be adapted to make the biggest difference for our students in our own jurisdiction. So here in South Australia, and certainly in public education, we could see that when we talked with so we did a process where we started talking with our students, asking them about their aspirations for the future. We talked to parents and leaders around what we should be striving for in public education. We talked to employers, importantly, as well, around what they were seeing they were going to need in the future. And so taking the Australian curriculum, and we're absolutely using the Australian curriculum, we're based on the Australian curriculum, but we're trying to respond to our context as well, make sure that this is going to work for our students in South Australia. And it was going to help our teachers the Australian curriculum can look like lots of content to deliver. It's almost kind of described as lots of pieces of content, and that can be overwhelming for teachers. And so one of the things that we did with the South Australian curriculum for public education was to take that content, it's the same content, but to take that content and help teachers to see what the through lines are from reception through to year 10. And the reason why that's important is because it helps teachers to understand what they might prioritise or the other parts of the curriculum. The curriculum's all important, but you're going to need to put some emphasis on some parts of the curriculum and not others. And what we didn't want was some of the important parts of the curriculum not being covered. So by talking about what those conceptual through lines are and organising the content around those big ideas, if you like, that run through all the way through the curriculum, it helps teachers to do the planning. So that was one thing. A second thing that we did was in the Australian curriculum, we've got the general capabilities. I think one of the weaknesses that we've seen of the general capabilities over time is that they've been seen almost as an add-on to the curriculum. And so South Australian educators have done a really good job in kind of folding the general capabilities into the curriculum. But again, what we wanted to do was to provide some guidance for educators. Say, well, there's some general capabilities and there's some specific capabilities. There's some things that, so in the general capabilities, we would talk about critical and creative thinking. We would talk about things like interpersonal skills. We would talk about intercultural understanding. And so previously, in the way that the Australian curriculum structured, you'd have to have a look at the content, what we're expecting students to be able to know and what we're expecting them to be able to do. You'd have to take that, and then you'd have to add in these capabilities. And so there were two. In fact, in the Australian curriculum, we've got the cross-curriculum priorities, so that's another layer. So there were kind of these three organisers in the Australian curriculum, and it could be overwhelming for teachers. So what we did was brought those together in the subject. So the organiser is the subject. So the general capabilities that are appropriate in a subject, we put those there. And specific capabilities, specific skills of subjects, we brought those to the fore as well. So if we take something like mathematics, for example, in the framing paper the shaping paper for mathematics, before the Australian curriculums even started, had a lot of evidence in there about what makes for effective maths learning. And that's in the Australian curriculum, but it's really de-emphasised. And yet those were the things that, when we talked to particularly employers and our teachers, they were saying, actually, those things should come to the top. So again, it's the same as the Australian curriculum. We've just provided emphasis to guide teachers. So one of those notions that's in the research is this notion of strategic competence that becomes problem solving in mathematics. And really that's about knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. So clearly in mathematics, our students have to be able to calculate. They have to be able to look at a maths question and go, I know how to do that, and do it. We have to do that teaching, that instruction. But we wouldn't be doing students justice if we left it at that. We've got to make sure that our students are also able to look at a maths problem and say, I don't know what to do, and then construct a response to that problem. Because that was the sort of thing that our employers were asking us for. What we've also added in the South Australian curriculum for public education is taking, as I say, the Australian curriculum, but recognising that there are dispositions that are really important as well. So one of the things that employers said to us, and teachers, and students as well in an interesting way, but if I just focus on the employers for a moment, one of the things that they said to us was that students lack resilience, that graduates who are going through and then going to the workplace can often lack resilience. And one of the places where we see that particularly is in mathematics. There's a little bit of maths anxiety that contributes to that. But if our sometimes students, if they feel like they haven't been taught a thing, that they then just can't answer the question. And employers were saying that means that people just won't have a go. They're not leaning in, they're not effective learners, they're not becoming problem solvers. So again, rather than putting that on the side somewhere and saying to educators, there's the subject, and then there's this, and there's this, and there's this that you've got to go for, what we really focused on was to say, well, let's bring that into the subject and interweave those things together. And in the Australian curriculum, in the achievement standards are fine. They talk about lots of what students know, probably underdone on what students can do, and nothing about dispositions and capabilities really in the achievement standards. So again, for teachers, it's difficult to know, in my assessment, do I just focus on knowledge and skills, or do I help students to be really effective learners as well? And so what we did was in the achievement standards, we just tweaked the achievement standards to make sure that the knowledge and skills that were required are still there, but also that we're making it our job to make sure that, for example, in mathematics, students have some of that resilience, students have that ability to come across a problem, not know what to do, stop and think, and then construct a response to the problem. So they're probably the main shifts that we've made. It's more shift of emphasis. It's not whole new content or anything like that. Our students who are in public schools in South Australia will be learning the same content as other students across Australia, but we're just making sure that it makes sense for students and it makes sense for teachers so that we can be more effective to get to those student outcomes.
Thank you. How much has been spent on this project? What's the cost? How much was spent last financial year? How much is budgeted to be spent in each year going forward?
I'll have to take that on notice, and I would note, though, that the work that we've done isn't just new work for the South Australian Curriculum for Public Education. This was work that we would have had to have done anyway, because the Australian curriculum had been updated to version 9 of the Australian curriculum. So we've taken the opportunity of having to do some implementation work anyway to do this work around the South Australian Public.
Thank you, and it would be potentially within the scope of what you're already taking on notice, but can I ask how many staff have been tasked to assist in the preparation of the curriculum? I imagine from within curriculum and learning there would be a cohort, but also how many seconded from schools or other areas?
Yeah, I'll absolutely do that. I'll have to take that on notice. I don't have that information in front of me. And one of the really important parts of this is, exactly as you say, we have staff in the department, but we've also made sure, even with the Australian curriculum for South Australian Public Education, in doing that work, we've also made sure that we're engaging with the community. So your point about the resource that's been required, absolutely we'll answer that question. But I think it is important to note that what we've been very careful to do is to not say that we've just got a bunch of experts in the department and that's all we're relying on. We've got great expertise in the department, but we're also making sure that this is going to work for teachers. So even now, when we've put the first subjects out, we've been very clear that we're looking for input back from the field to make sure that not only is this high quality curriculum, but it can be delivered and teachers can engage with it. And so in the classroom, it has to have the biggest impact that it can. So we're getting high quality delivery. Because if we're going to make a difference, that difference only occurs in that space between a teacher and a student. And so anything we do with the curriculum, it's one thing to have a beautiful curriculum, but it's another thing to make sure that it's impacting on that interaction.
With that in mind, is there a program of support for teachers or professional development to help them implement that new curriculum? Will the department be paying for professional development, for example, to help teachers become familiar with 19 dispositions, is it?
Yeah, can I just pick up on that point of the dispositions? There are a number of dispositions, but the dispositions all make sense within the subject. Okay. So the reason why I'm picking up on it is because there's a danger that we see curriculum as being lots of little pieces. And so you've got to teach these pieces of content, you've got to teach these pieces of skills, you've got to teach these pieces of dispositions, and we can make it look like it's overwhelming. And in fact, that's what the Australian curriculum really looks like. And so for the work around the dispositions, we're making sure that the dispositions are folded into the subjects. So you've got one subject.
Well, perhaps I can simplify the question then and just ask, is there a support for professional development for teachers to assist in teaching the new curriculum?
Yeah. So we're about to appoint a new director for a directorate around teaching and learning to do exactly this. And again, we're getting that balance right between expertise within the system, so people who understand curriculum, learning, and I think there's something really important about assessment as well. But getting curriculum, learning and assessment, people with that kind of expertise to be able to influence the system. But what we know in public education in South Australia is that our teachers have got absolutely fantastic expertise. Some of the best teachers in the country are here in South Australia. And they often want to stay in the schools and they want to stay teaching the students. And so one of the ways that we know that we can make a huge difference and really add value is yet through specific professional learning that might be delivered by the department, but also making sure that we're sharing the expertise that exists within the system. That was something that I certainly learned from when I was at the SACE board, that actually our educators in South Australia have got a great deal of expertise. And so there's something about kind of trusting our teachers and making sure that we're drawing out that expertise and we're sharing it across the system. And that's exactly what we're doing through this process. I think assessment is an area that we'll need to focus on as well. So we've got the Australian curriculum, we've got our modified version where we've adapted it and just put emphasis in different places. And so the assessment will be the same, and of course in our assessment we want to know what students know and we want to know what they can do. But what we're increasingly finding is that the demands of employers include those knowledge and skills, but they're also including those dispositions. They're also including the way that students kind of turn up in their learning and are leaning in. And so that hasn't been a focus of assessment in the past, and I think there are jurisdictions around the world, and there's some great work going on here in Australia, particularly I'd pick out Melbourne University for a local example and Cambridge Assessment for an international example. And I think the SACE board actually has been doing some leading work in South Australia, and so we'll draw on the expertise and experience of the SACE board as well to make sure that we're assessing those dispositions, and that's wrapped into our assessment in a meaningful way. When you think about some of the changes and things like artificial intelligence, we think about how artificial intelligence is going to influence teaching and assessment. We have to make sure that our teachers and our system is ready to move with changes as
so the department will be providing support for that professional development?
Yeah.
Thank you. Minister, is there a reason why the title specifically highlights public education? It's an issue that's been raised with me by some people at independent and Catholic schools. They're wondering whether there is an intentional exclusion of those students and schools that are not in the government system when it talks about this South Australian curriculum for public education.
Professor West will answer that question for you.
Thanks, Minister. Across Australia and even within South Australia, education sectors will have frameworks that they'll use around education, and that flows into curriculum. So for us, without the work that we did, as I say, starting with students, working through teachers, families, employers, got us to a place where we were saying, well, there's some choices that we're making for public education. And those choices flowed through as focus areas of impact for the work across the department. So they're focusing on excellence and equity, well-being, because we know that well-being flows through into effective learning, and students' learning and students' achievement. Student agency, for exactly the same reasons, that notion of we want our students to be agents in their learning, not passive, so that they become really effective learners, and we know that that flows through into achievement. And then this notion of effective learners. So some of the work, international work, showing us really clearly that some of the interventions that you can make in education to achieve better achievement outcomes might focus on things like student self-regulation and metacognition. So some choices across the department that then flow through into informing the curriculum. And this happens in all of our sectors. So in Catholic education, for example, they have the Living, Learning, Leading framework, which is their framing. And then when the curriculum within it, and if we just have a look at the CSER, Catholic Education South Australia website, they talk about how all their curriculum areas have a religious dimension. Because that's appropriate for Catholic education, but it wouldn't be appropriate for public education. So they have a framework, and that flows through into the way that they put their curriculum together. Similarly, if I look at Lutheran education, they have the overarching framework that they call Lifelong Qualities for Learning. And then again, in their documentation, they talk about how this is a frame to deal with changing content, and schools can use the Lifelong Qualities for Learning framework to align subjects beneath it and cluster outcomes and objectives. And that's in their curriculum framework notion. So everybody's still doing the Australian curriculum, but what we're doing is we're making sure that when we are clear about what our purpose is for public education, and in these cases Catholic and Lutheran education, that the curriculum can serve that, and so we can get the outcomes that we're looking for our young people.
I might just add a little bit to answer your question too. Member for Morialta, there's absolutely no intention to exclude. I certainly wouldn't support that, and I've met with the non-government system leaders and Neil about this on several occasions to do my best to answer questions. Had many conversations with Professor Westwell about that, and he has met with them as well. I don't want any situation where one of the sectors feels excluded, and I've been reassured by Professor Westwell, as he just said in his answer there, that there is scope within the Australian curriculum to have that kind of focus. It's used by other sectors in South Australia, which is entirely appropriate, and you would absolutely expect them to do so. And we're not seeking to do anything different. Yes, you want to add something else as well?
Yes. So the work that we do in terms of the resources that we'll produce around the curriculum, so that description of the curriculum, as I said, and the way in which we're organising those concepts, all of that work that we're doing, all of that will, as we've done before, all of that will be available across sectors, and in the same way they'll be able to use that and adapt it as they've done in the past.
Preempted my last question on that run, so thank you for that. Thank you. Page 180, I'll stay on expenses. I just have some questions about some specific consultancies and contracts that were identified in the annual report this year that would have all been paid for out of that expenses line. There are some descriptions in the annual report, but there are several where I'm seeking further description. The first is in relation to Oricon, $39,000 to develop a business case relating to the establishment of new high school accommodation within this Adelaide CBD and inner north areas to meet future enrolment demand. Is that a very late invoice for work that was done in 2020 and 2021 to assist in the development of the case for the Adelaide Botanic expansion, or is this further work that has been done in the last couple of years contemplating potential further accommodation being required in the Adelaide CBD and inner north?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. I'm informed that is the work from previously.
All right, thank you. That's probably the easiest one of them. Sayers Advisory was given $915,000 to undertake research as part of our National Leadership Initiative in the National Schools Reform Agreement. Is the Minister able to identify which reform, what are they doing, and is there a reason it's being paid by the department rather than through Education Council, to which I believe the department makes payments for national school reform work?
Member for Morialta, I'm informed that we were leading the work nationally on National Formative Assessment Initiative.
Oh, yeah.
And I understand that...
That sounds like something that I might have started.
Well, that will depend on who paid the $915,000. No, but in all seriousness, we believe, and we will check this, that the $915,968 was paid to the state to do that work and then expended by us, but we will double check that, but it was certainly for the National Formative.
Oh, I see. So we might have received funding from Education Council to pay this.
Correct.
Excellent.
Well, that's what happened if I did it. If you did it, it's, it's a blowout.
It's one of those irregular verbs. On the next page of the annual report is Deloitte Financial Advisory, which is $342,000 to prepare a business case to support the case for change to guide life cycle infrastructure investment.
Yep.
The language notwithstanding, that sounds like it was contracted at late notice. Can you explain what that means?
Yes, happy to. I'll pass over to Ben Templey to answer that question.
Through you, Minister, that work formed a component of the 20-year infrastructure plan. So specifically, what we were looking for in that work is the optimum way to prioritise and allocate funding for the sustainment of existing assets in the system. So the 20-year infrastructure plan identifies investment for new facilities where there are demographic changes and capacity increases required. The other component, or one of the other components, is the notion of sustaining investment in infrastructure, and that is the money that we invest in schools to renew and replace existing buildings and infrastructure in schools. So this work was to assist us with that.
Were any other contractors or consultants employed to assist with the preparation of the 20-year infrastructure plan, or was this it? Along with departmental effort, I'm sure.
Member for Morialta, we might check. Mr Templey informs me that there might have been some others, but we might give you a detailed answer on what they were and what the costs were, if indeed there were any.
That's very helpful, thank you. Is the business case prepared by Deloitte for the 20-year infrastructure plan publicly available or likely to become publicly available, or is that a cabinet document?
It's a cabinet document.
Save ourselves some time there. Will Cabinet release the document?
No.
It's outrageous. Sorry for the commentary, sir. Can I ask then, still on expenses, contractors, there is $635,000 for a company called, and I apologise if I mispronounce, but Camo Mix with a CH at the start. IT management. It says professional services for departmental initiatives. Able to identify, it's on page 40 of the annual report if that helps, $635,706.88. You're able to identify which departmental initiatives those professional services are for?
I understand it's contract IT staff who would have worked on a range of initiatives across the department.
Throughout the annual report, there's quite a lot of contractors in the IT space doing various IT work. My understanding is the department also has a fairly large IT cohort themselves. Why are there so many external contracts for IT services? Are these ongoing, or are they individual short-term projects that just benefit from having external assistance rather than employing ongoing staff for short-term projects?
We'll take that on notice, Member for Morialta.
Thank you. There's $3.2 million identified for a company called Expose Data Party Limited, professional services for departmental initiatives, in brackets Ed Analytics. That doesn't quite sound like IT to me. Is the Minister able to explain what that $3.2 million contract is for?
I'll pass over to Ben Templey, who can give you some on that.
Through you, Minister, that engagement was in support of the Ed Analytics project, which was a project to update and replace all the department's data warehousing capability. It included a bit more than that, so it was looking at the provision of data throughout the agency to support the department's operations. And there was obviously data integration work as part of that as well. Expose were our key partner in that work.
All right, so presumably that's a transition cost required, but the ongoing benefits are either improved productivity or lower costs going forward?
That's correct.
Trust that'll be the case, so thank you. There's a series of contracts for KPMG. Some of them are financial analysis, workforce management and EMS. It's relatively self-explanatory. There's $625,000 towards the project that Mr. Templey's just described. There's another $770,000 on top of that, which just says professional services for departmental initiatives. Given that there are 4 other departmental initiatives separately billed to KPMG, what is the $770,000 for?
We'll take that on notice, Member for Morialta.
Thank you. PricewaterhouseCoopers have been paid $200,000. They've also received a number of things, but they're separately identified. But $200,717 specifically for professional services for machinery of government transition support. Which MOG change was this related to?
I'm informed, Member from Morialta, that is for the Skills into the Education Department Machinery of Government move.
Can I ask, was this the only cost associated with that MOG, or were there other costs as well? I'm talking transition costs, obviously, not just the added costs of things transferred over.
We will check and take on notice and get back to you, but Mr Bernardi says he doesn't think there was any more, but in abundance of caution, we'll check.
And what was...
Question following this to be going to...
Sure, thank you.
Newland.
The Chair has again spotted when I'm getting to the end of a run, so thank you for that, sir. $200,000 strikes me as a fair amount to pay to a consulting firm or a contractor to assist with shifting one government agency into another. Maybe it's a perfectly reasonable amount. I'm wondering if the Minister is able to identify what services were provided. I assume they weren't shifting desks.
We'll take that on notice, Member from Morialta.
Member for Newland.
Thank you, Chair. I refer to Budget Paper 5, page 18, relating to the Materials and Services Charge subsidy. At a time when many families are struggling with the cost of living, what is the government doing to assist families with the cost of children's education and schooling?
Thank you, Member for Newland, for your question, and pleased to provide the committee with some information around what this government is doing in terms of trying to address cost of living as best we can in a difficult environment we know around cost of living. And there's a number of, I think, good practical initiatives that we have implemented in our time in government so far to try and do that. I think foremost is the Materials and Services Charge rebate, or school fees for public school families. We introduced or announced an additional $24 million in the most recent state budget to continue the Material and Services Charge rebate for eligible families into the 2025 school year, and increase that amount to $200 per student, which I think is significant when you consider if you are a family with 3 school-age kids, you save $600 on fees. And this brings the total investment to around $60 million, benefiting the parents and caregivers, we estimate, of about 120,000 government school students. The prescribed Material and Services Charge currently is $287 for primary and $379 for secondary. And that's, of course, before the $200 rebate is applied, and that is applied automatically. And it would be remiss of me not to give a mention here to all the bursars at our schools who do all the hard work to make sure it is a seamless process for parents that they don't have to involve themselves in, but simply get the deducted figure to pay, which is excellent. And they are often unheralded people in all our schools, Catholic, independent and public, and do a lot of important work. So I acknowledge the role they have played here in delivering this rebate. I think there are, of course, other costs as well that families incur when sending their kids to school outside of fees, and must keep in mind here that those families that are eligible for the school card, and I'll speak in a moment around changes we've made to the eligibility threshold there, but they are not eligible for the rebate because they don't need to pay the materials and services charge. But the school card income thresholds has increased by more than $4,500 to $70,994, being the threshold if you have one dependent child in terms of what you can earn as a family and still be eligible for the school card, and then up to $76,066 for 5 children attending a public school. Now, I certainly acknowledge and want to acknowledge in this place that $76,000 and 5 children as a combined household income, would be a very, very difficult place to be financially for a family with current cost of living. I acknowledge that. It would be hard to make ends meet on that kind of household salary. But I think that speaks to why this is important, and I think a saving in the vicinity of if it was a school card and you had 5 children and they were in primary or secondary, 287 or 379 per child would make a really big difference to those families. It's something that I've spoken to the executive team in the department about a lot, around trying to keep an eye on numbers in terms of those eligible applying and receiving a school card, because I think it's important that we keep an eye on that given current cost of living pressures, and just consider in the back of our minds whether or not changes need to be made in the future. And of course, a cost comes with that, because we are foregoing income that would come into state government coffers. But I certainly would hate to think of families that are out there and feel like they can't even afford to send their kids to a public school where the fees are still very, very low. I might just talk quickly on this subject about a couple of other cost of living things we've done outside of the materials and services rebate and the changes to the school card income thresholds. One is school breakfast program, which we know is really important, and we made an announcement around increasing funding for Kickstart for Kids and Food Bank, so they can deliver more meals over the life of the agreement. The figure I have in my head is, I think we increased it by $1 million over the life of the agreement, up from maybe 400,000 to 1.4 million, which is going to be really important to make sure those kids who don't get breakfast before they leave the house can have something at school, because we all know that they're not going to be in a position to sit and learn and listen and pay attention if they have empty stomachs. And all our sites tell us that it's something that they are seeing a lot, and I think something they are seeing more of given the current cost of living pressures that families are feeling. School device program is the one I might finish on, though, because I acknowledge that although we are delivering really significant rebates to the materials and services charge, and as I said, if you had 3 kids, it would be $600, which is good, a lot of families do say that the biggest cost that they wear now in terms of sending a kid to public school is the cost of a device. And we've changed from a position where it was something that maybe you needed to have. Certainly when I was at school, and I would imagine when the member for Morialta was at school, it wasn't necessarily something you needed to have. Yes, very good. And when the chair went to school, I was going to say, I don't know whether they provided typewriters or you had to bring your own, but I think we have to do something around. And we are trying to take action and I acknowledge the work of the member for Morialta on the digital device strategy as well. It was a really good initiative. We are continuing it. By 2026, all families on the school card in public schools will receive their device free of charge. But we're also doing some good work here, and I acknowledge Dan Hughes' team on, and it's part of why the EMS rollout is important so that the department has visibility from a procurement sense over what schools are buying and trying to better use our purchasing power as a department to buy digital devices at a cheaper rate and then passing that cheaper rate on to families who are forking out one, 2 or 3 laptops. I see there as being some real potential savings we can make into the future if we get that right, not just for families who are receiving a school card and outside of the materials and services rebate.
And 80 of Volume 1 is expenses. The next couple of lines are on this same budget line. I acknowledge the Minister's answer before and for the record highlight the role of the Honourable Rob Lucas in identifying that Gonski allocation could be spent on cost of living relief measures, and that remains, appears one of his lasting legacies to South Australian public school families.
And we don't acknowledge Rob enough in this place, of course. I've been...
and on the digital device strategy, I commend the government for continuing that work. That was, I think, started under us, but also particularly was the logical extension of the Swift Internet program that was delivered under the former government, acknowledging that it was instigated as we were coming in. So,
Agreed.
with that positivity out of the way, the Labor Party promised at the last election 100 extra wellbeing staff. The former government had budgeted for and started work on recruiting a proportion of those, I think 55 or 60 of them. Last year, I understand that there were, I think it was 58 were either already employed or on the cusp of being employed. What is the update in relation to this project? As I understand, there were 42 roles that were still being worked out, what those roles would be, what their qualifications would be, and where they would be employed and when they would be employed.
Member for Morialta for your question. As at the 14th of June, I think 94.5 FTEs have been recruited since the change in government, which is good because it's a difficult climate in which to do it. Skill shortages left, right and centre, and always the risk, I think, particularly in a smaller labour market like ours, that you just move the workforce from one area of need to another area of need. But I think we've done exceptionally well here to already have very close to the full 100 FTE. And within that figure, the school mental health service accounts for 55, and other learning support specialist positions account for 45. I might get some more detail around what they are for you. So we have the school mental health service, as I mentioned, social work duty line, a partnership with KWY, the Aboriginal, or the ACO, Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisation. A flexible service response team, which brings together telepractice and the external provider process to improve access and responsiveness of services. Principal occupational therapist. That's sort of, I guess, a flavour of where we're at and in terms of the positions that are being provided. I think I should speak a little bit about the school mental health service and the 55 FTEs that we have there. Particularly proud that we've done that. It's really, really important. I think the state of young people's mental health, and probably the workforce as well, is in bad shape. And I think so much of the dysregulation, poor behaviour, a lot of it now is driven by poor mental health, particularly a real rise in that at primary school level, which I've said before is the thing that really keeps me awake at night, around primary age kids with suicidal ideation, which was either something that we didn't have when I was at primary school, which is probably not true, or just something that we didn't talk about very much. But is impressed upon me and the leadership team by principals and classroom teachers all the time. I'm really pleased that we've got a dedicated school mental health service there to provide that support, because it's great for the individual, but I think it will really contribute to the general kind of climate environment of the school in terms of helping kids who are struggling with their own mental health stay at school, because we know it's a really big reason now for not completing school and not going to school and school refusal and all those things. So I think it's a space that we have to move into. I'm glad we made this election commitment. I want to commend the team from the department who's been working so diligently to get us almost all the way there to that 100 FTE, and what I have to say are difficult circumstances for recruitment.
Can I ask that school mental health service that the Minister so elegantly characterised just then, is that 55 FTE? Is that the total figure for the school mental health service, or are there more than that?
55 is the total figure.
Thank you. And to frame the next question, the 55 figure, I think Mr Humphreys might have been with Dr Crozabalo when they briefed me on the design of the program that they'd put together for this, and it's good to hear that it's rolling out, but I can identify that's the group that were funded prior to the election. So the extra 45 people that are the cohort that is new funding, can I ask about those? The Minister said the social work duty line, which certainly sounds like a useful sounding measure. The KWY partnership, the flexible service response team, and the principal occupational therapist positions. Is the Minister able to identify, I'm happy to have it on notice if he prefers, how many fall into each of those categories in the extra 40 odd or 45 positions, 40 of which have been filled? And if there are any other categories, then how many in those categories?
Yeah, I will take that on notice. As I said, speech pathology, I'll give you the detail I can and come back to you on the rest. Speech pathology, psychology, social work, it's about 5, I think. This is in terms of the FTE recruited since government, so not necessarily the total bucket, but what we've recruited. In the school mental health service, I think we're at 48.2 currently recruited, which I think is, I'm actually really pleased that we've managed to get that many, and it's very close to our target of 55. Occupational therapy, psychology, speech pathology, developmental educator, Aboriginal cultural officer, 4.9. That goes under the specialist support to autism inclusion teachers through a multidisciplinary team. So that is separate to the AITs, but is a team within this bucket to support the work they do. Flexible service response team to increase access to specialist services. Comprises of a speech pathologist, psychologist, Aboriginal cultural officer, seconded teacher. I'm not sure, what does AHP stand for? Sorry, Allied Health Practitioner, or AHP, Speech Pathology Team Manager, and we've got 12 recruited so far, but on the other ones that I was not able to announce, the Aboriginal Community Controlled Organisation is 3. On the others, I'll come back to you.
And not wanting to dwell too long, the KWY partnership, is that 3 people working for KWY but providing services to the department, or are they 3 departmental staff who are working on a broader partnership with KWY?
We'll take that on notice.
Thank you. The same budget line expenses, a couple of questions about truancy. Is the Minister able to identify how many chronic truancy referrals has the department received so far,
Yes,
and how does that compare with previous years?
Thank you, Member Morialta, for a very important question about truancy, which remains an ongoing issue in the South Australian education system, as it does right around Australia, particularly post-COVID, which is something I know the member for Morialta dealt with in excruciating detail. South Australia's attendance rate improved by 1.8% from 84.5 in 2022 to 86.3 in 2023. still below pre-COVID rates, but thankfully improving. And I know there was a real concern when I came into the role, and I'm sure it had been something that the member for Morialta, the previous minister, had discussed, a real worry that a lot of those who stopped attending school during COVID for whatever reason just wouldn't come back, and that we wouldn't be able to lift our attendance rates back to where they were. Thankfully, I think what we're seeing is that that's not necessarily the case, and we can improve it, and that 1.8% increase we've had, I think, is a really positive sign. We're seeing some positive trends this year with termly operational data indicating a further 1% increase in term 1 of this year compared to term 4 of last year, so it shows that we're on a good trajectory. From this same operational data, the number of students identified as having 80% or more of the term with unauthorised absences was 571 in term 1 of this year, almost a third less than term 1 last year, which is really good news. I thought I might touch upon prosecutions because I've been really pushing the team on that, and I continue to do so. It's something I raise routinely with Professor Westwell, but also with the team within the department that looks after this. And I've said I don't think there's any point in having clauses or powers under acts that sit idle and aren't used, because people very quickly work out that it's a paper tiger and nothing to be concerned about, and it therefore doesn't achieve what it was enacted to do, which is to change people's behaviour. And we know that in terms of prosecutions, what we are talking about here is using it in cases where parents, carers or guardians have played an active role in preventing their kids from going to school. I do not support, and I know the member for Morialta didn't either, a situation where we prosecute families that are amidst terrible dysfunction because it will not get the kid to school, and it'll probably just compound whatever issues the family is dealing with. But there are unfortunately cases out there where parents do play an active role in actually preventing their kids from going to school, or not doing what they should be doing as parents to get them to school. So since coming to government, the department has considered 46 families, which involves a total of 77 children. Of those 46 cases, 20 cases which involve 29 children are currently being closely monitored or are under assessment and investigation, or have been referred, it would be to Crown, for legal advice. So that is really getting near the pointy end where we are progressing it through to Crown for legal advice on the likelihood of a successful prosecution. Of the 26 cases where prosecution will not be pursued at this time, 17 are cases where an improvement in attendance and engagement was seen, which is the best outcome here. And I think you would expect any minister to say this, but I feel that what has vindicated the position I have taken is that I think that as some families that fall into that category of playing a role in preventing their kids from going to school or not actively encourage them to go to school have actually seen the whites of our eyes, so to speak, and seen that we are serious about taking it all the way, magically kids have gone back to school and re-engaged, which is a good outcome, and I think shows why us going through this process is an important one. The remaining 9 were not pursued due to a range of factors, including complex family situations, which I referred to, essentially a situation where we don't think a prosecution would have the intended outcome at all. The family moving interstate, involvement of Department for Child Protection, or the child being above the age of compulsion to go to school. I'm pursuing a number of amendments to the Education and Children's Services Act to better manage attendance and participation. Addressing non-attendance is an ongoing priority. We've initiated a number of initiatives to do that. The collaboration with KYW, new attendance outreach team, which is supporting identified schools to track and follow up students with concerning levels of absence across 10 trial partnerships. 10 primary schools are trialling the impact of having a part-time dedicated staff member focused on attendance. A central attendance hub offering attendance training, resources and support to schools will be established in 2025, and an additional 5 senior social worker positions have been funded to meet the increasing demands experienced by schools to address complex matters of non-attendance.
Thank you. In relation to the Minister's answer, would the Minister extend his consideration for potential prosecutions to not just those families he's characterised as where they are actively seeking to suppress their students' attendance? One of the last prosecutions, I think, was in relation to a parent who was seeking their child work in their business rather than go to school. So that would be an example of that. But also, would the Minister consider extending that prosecution possibility to those families who are just making no effort to engage in supporting their child to go back to school? And with that in mind, I particularly have the example of the Education Family Conference model, which is now available. Parents who refuse to participate or don't turn up to participate in that model. Would the Minister characterise those also as being potential for prosecution?
I give this answer without having consulted the department about it, but yes, I would. My pragmatic approach on all these things, Member for Morialta, is if the experts tell me that they think it can help and have the desired outcome, which is in this case get a kid who is missing out on their schooling to go to school, then I think we should consider it. And if we have powers available to us where appropriate, we need to use them. So yes, I would.
And can the Minister provide, either now or on notice, how many students have been referred for an Education Family Conference in the last year, and what has been the outcome of those conferences? If it's easier to provide it on a year-by-year basis, because I think some information was provided last year, for example, I'm happy to have it in whatever format the Minister is able to.
We have come prepared for your question on this one.
Bravo.
Education Family Conferences have been implemented statewide as a new way to address chronic non-attendance. I know the member for Morialta knows all these things. They are structured, strengths-based and family-led planning meetings which ensure student and family voice are part of the solution. They were independently evaluated in 2023 and found that the conferences contribute to a range of positive outcomes for students, families and schools, including increased connection and strengthened communication between students, families and the school. That is really important. Increased connection to social and community supports, improved student and family wellbeing, building and repairing relationships between students, families and schools, schools feeling more supported with a clear plan that is family-led. 75% of students who have finalised an EFC, an Education Family Conference, have had improved levels of school attendance. Number of Education Family Conferences, 2021, number of referrals to EFC, 19, 2022, 23, 2023, 22, 2024 to date is 13, so I'm confident to say by the end of this year that will be the highest number that we've had in terms of referrals to EFC, so I'm glad it is being used. And then number of students involved in the individual referral, 2021 it was 36, 2022 it was 39, 2023 it was 27, year to date 20, again I think we will get our highest number there. And where appropriate, the Social Work Truancy Service can work with families and schools to support re-engagement. The department has 34 FTE social workers truancy positions.
Can I go to the page 179, highlights and targets, and just finish off this session with a few questions about technical colleges? Is the Minister able to...
Member for... After you, the member for Playford, Florey would like to ask a question.
I'll just, it's fine.
You continue with your question.
I will ask a question in relation to page 179, highlights and targets on technical colleges. In relation to Findon High School, can the Minister advise on the current status of enrolments? And if it assists, I'll just run through these quickly. If the Minister wants to take it unnoticed, then the member for Florey can have a go. So how many Year 10 students in the college, in the technical college, and how many other Year 10 students are at the school? How many Year 11 students are at the college, and how many other Year 11 students are at the school? How many students are engaged in the technical college who aren't students at the school, and what courses are they doing? And how many apprentices and trainees are there at Findon Technical College?
I'll take the bulk of that on notice. I'm happy to come back to the member for Morialta on that. What I'd say is, we have filled Findon. As I said at the time of the opening, we had a lot of feedback from students from around the metropolitan area and some, I think, from further abroad who were very keen to go but didn't want to leave their host school. And given this was the first one that we've done, there's obviously going to be a few learnings, so to speak, from that. And that's why we accommodated the flexible model. Some are part-time, some are full-time, and that is a way to make sure those who wanted to come and benefit from the great curriculum, the industry pathways, the state-of-the-art equipment can do so without leaving their school. So I think we were flexible and adapted to that in an appropriate way. It was certainly no shortage of interest in going along, and the feedback we've since had from the students there and from the team has been overwhelmingly positive. The first one is always going to be the most difficult one to do because we didn't have an existing example of a tech college to show families what it looks like and what to expect. But now we do for all those that are going to follow, which will greatly, I think, help those who are considering it as an option for their Year 10 child to go and have a look at, for instance, Findon and get an idea of just how impressive it is and what's on offer there. But on the other questions, I'll come back to the member for Morialta.
Member for Florey.
Thank you, sir. Reference budget paper number 4, volume 1, page 179, the highlights that mention the specialist teacher workforce plan. My question is, how is the government delivering its election commitment on teaching quality?
Member for Florey for your question. So a number of things that we have done, some of which we have touched upon already in the member for Morialta asked questions around giving principals more say in choosing staff that are right for their site, truncating that process around addressing poor performance and giving earlier and better advice to staff, increasing permanency, making the country allowances ongoing, financial literacy, which is one I've been fond of talking about, the ban in mobile phones. So there's a number of things that we have done, and I want to also just use the opportunity to thank SAPA and SASPA for some excellent work that they have done, the Secondary and Primary Principals Associations, on the exact title escapes me, recasting the role of the principal. Which they have done, which has been a really good collaborative piece between them and the department around reconceptualising their role, so looking at what it needs to be now, because it has changed and it has got harder, and school leaders are community leaders as well, so we have done some good work there with those really important representative groups on sort of reconceptualising what the role should be moving forward and making adjustments that we need to make. I've touched already upon country allowances, which we have made ongoing, increasing permanency, and we're doing that at a rate that we haven't seen before. I'm really pleased that we've managed to introduce our financial literacy materials. I've said before that was directly inspired by the work of Scott Pape, the Barefoot Investor, and I was fortunate to have a number of direct conversations with him where I pitched him ideas around the things he thought that needed to be in there. I think it drastically and desperately needed updating. The stuff that was being taught just wasn't appropriate for 2024. There's all, for examples, we need to teach kids around things like Afterpay. How do they make their money? How does it work? Mobile phone contracts. There's a lot of kids in the one-on-one sessions that we have had, which Professor Westwell has steward of, the feedback from students in the senior high school levels when you ask them what is it that you'd like to see more of in your schooling is more stuff around, they describe it as adulting, the kind of things that I think many of us probably assume is taught at home, which might not be now. How to do a tax return, some simple things like that that need to be folded into what we offer at schools, and a key part of that is financial literacy, and I'm glad that we've done that.
Brief question and brief answer.
I'll stay on the same 179 technical colleges. Has the Minister continued discussions with Catholic Education about the use by public school students of the Western Technical College? Have we made any advances, and are there any figures the Minister can provide about the number of public schools, or indeed the number of public students that are making use of the opportunity for the Western Technical College?
I don't have any figures, but I've certainly continued those conversations, and I think I should put on the record too that I feel I have, and I've said this to the Catholic Education South Australia, I feel like I've made good on the commitment I made before becoming Minister to make sure that what we offered was complementing what the Catholic sector was offering, and I have stuck to my guns on that, and so has Claire Feschuk and her team. So, and an example is what we're going to offer in Port Augusta, where I think Caritas wrote to me asking for the reverse, essentially, which was, could our students please have a model where they can come to the tech college? And that's exactly what we're going to deliver, and I think that's a really good thing because, as someone who grew up in a country area, the idea that a brand spanking new technical college is built and only some kids can get access to it is not a great thing. On the Western Tech, I don't have any figures. I can seek to come back on that, but I think I'm on safe territory saying that we've taken a position which is not to discourage students in our system from potentially, accessing Western Tech, and we are promoting access to ours in country areas as well. And I think that is all sort of underscored by the fact that if we are to get on top of the skills challenges that we've got, we have to all be pulling in the same direction. And that includes with technical colleges at high school level, and I think we've found a way where we have been able to do that.
The allotted time having expired, I declare examination of school education complete. Member for Flory.
Sir, I move that the sitting of the committee be suspended until 11:50 a.m.
Is that seconded? That's seconded. I'll put those in favour say aye, those against say no. I call it for the ayes.